At the end of the day, Brexit, first and foremost about money, exposing how little people understand about the decision and the ramifications here in America. As people celebrate the decision and use it as a political tool, they're forgetting the massive hit taken on Wall Street today, the potential for millions of Americans losing tens of millions of dollars in both standard stock investments and their retirement plans. Most may be able to recover, but some will feel the financial sting of what certain groups believe is good for the American middle class. Food for thought. We dig deeper into the fiscal take on Brexit with Miranda Kahn.
And there's really only one way to describe the global response to Brexit, and that's shocked or gobsmacked, to use the British slang. No one saw this coming, but it didn't take long for word to spread or for the world to react. The British pound dropped to its lowest level against the dollar in more than 30 years, sending shockwaves through the international markets.
Absolute disaster. I just can't believe it's happened.
The choice to Brexit, as it's been called, has also left question marks over the fate of London as Europe's top financial center.
Kevin, you got it!
Already, European Central Bank says it may force euro trading out of London.
Will things go to Frankfurt or Paris, or will they actually move to New York?
There's also fears that major investment banks could move thousands of jobs.
It's costly for the economy, bad for the banks.
And possibly bad for the more than 2 million people who work in the country's financial industry.
Outrageous. I think it's terrible. I think worst day in British history for like 50 years.
And Ed, you mentioned how the Brexit is also affecting us across the pond. U.S. stocks fell sharply this morning, with the Dow Jones dropping more than 600 points. Bank stocks were among the biggest losers today, and the move could affect 401k retirement funds right here at home. Ed, back to you.
All right, thanks, Miranda. Back to tearing into the Brexit decision, seeking some facts. Once again, inviting your phone calls, your comments on how this may or may not affect you. And if you see this as something that will drive the message of a certain candidate home and give him a leg up in the American presidential race. Get in line right now. Drop your comments and questions. 1-877-NEWSMAX, 1-877-639-7629. Once again, let's welcome back former member of the Conservative Party of the British Parliament, John Browne, joins us here in the studio. And we're joined now by online national columnist for the Baltimore Post-Examiner and British native of Northern Ireland, Martin Sieff. I want to thank you both. John, thanks for sticking around. Martin, let me thank you for joining us as well. Your book, Cycles of Change, we want to point out as well, because we are certainly in the midst of cycles of change right now between the two governments and what's happening around the world. Martin, first of all, we are talking about the change of nations here, because not only is Britain now deciding to leave, but now there's the talk that Scotland says we are out next. Are they going to be the only one? Do you think they will be the next to go?
They could be the next to go from Britain. They say they want to stay in Europe. It's quite possible that they will. But a great mistake that pessimists about the British are making is looking at the Europeans, John, as a monolith. If the European Union was strong and mighty and united, then it would be insane for Britain to pull out. But Europe is not like that. Britain has created more jobs in the past 5 years than the other 4 or 5 major European Western economies combined. The British are much more adaptive than the Europeans. The central banks of the mainland countries have been extremely negative in holding back economic growth. And there are strong movements to pull out of Europe based on economic grounds in Germany and in France, and for that matter in Italy too.
So, John, let me bring you into this now, and I want to work off something Martin just said here. Is it just as simple to say that the rest of the European Union and the other countries did not hold up their end of the bargain? They took advantage of Britain, their economy, their people, and that's why we've been led to this point?
Well, I agree with what Martin said, actually. I don't know that they took advantage of Britain. They've always felt we were the odd man out. And basically, for historical reasons, they haven't exactly liked us, either the French or the Germans. And there's they run the European Union, the Franco-German axis. They have special meetings before all European Union meetings to sort out the agenda. We're not at that table, and yet we're meant to be a full member. I mean, they've really tried to hit us. They tried to hit the City of London with a transaction tax, that everything you'll share would have to pay a tax to the European Union. And they tried to hurt London, and they've tried to hurt us on a number of occasions. They've taken our fishing zones. We'll get all those back. There are all sorts of nations. Some nations that are not got any seashore at all are fishing in our waters.
I guess that's what I mean by taking advantage of. Certainly
Yes.
they use it to their best advantage. Let's talk about the political side of this. President Obama said that the relationship between the U.S. and Great Britain is not going to change. But last April, when he was in England, he said if the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, they would no longer have trade deal priority. Here's what he said.
Some point down the line, there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue. Us having access to a big market with a lot of countries, rather than trying to do piecemeal trade agreements, is hugely inefficient.
Martin, let me bring you in on this because the president said the words back of queue. And I've already seen a number of reports today and people saying that the president himself is the one who basically made a huge miscalculation here. The British people heard that he is part of the reason why Brexit went through today. It was part of what he said. Do you agree with that?
Completely. The British people, Ed, do not like to be lectured to by foreign leaders. They do not like to be pushed around. The Italian Prime Minister does not realize that. Chancellor Merkel in Germany, a much wiser leader, does realize that. President Obama backed down before President Putin of Russia. He backed down before President Xi of China. He's backed down before the Iranians. Guess what? He's going to have to back down before Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage as well.
Martin, what do you think this new order will look like? Because obviously we're going to see countries shifting and changing, leaving and moving here. What do you think will emerge? And remembering, of course, that it takes 2 years for this departure of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. So what do you think we'll see in 3 years?
I'm hoping we will see the return of a concert of Europe. People don't realize a recent Pew poll, the most recent Pew poll, shows that objection to staying in the EU is as high in Germany as it is in Britain. And there are other countries where it is almost as high. The European Union shot itself in the foot, not just with the British people, but all across Europe. Marine Le Pen is the most rapidly rising and popular leader in France, and what she says about Brussels is spot on. So this is not just the British defying all of Europe, a European consensus of 500 million people, as President Obama, in his real ignorance of Europe, imagines. This is the beginning of a movement of liberation for the other peoples of Europe. It's not an anti-French or anti-Italian or anti-German movement. Patriots and conservatives in all those countries think alike and get on very well. Brussels is the problem. Big government is the problem.
Let me then take your words, and John, I want to bring you back in here because Martin used the phrase liberation in there. There's people using it today, and they're talking about Donald Trump, who talked about this morning while he was talking about his golf courses, of course, but mentioning Brexit while he was talking in Scotland. And he seemed to forget that Scotland actually voted 2-1 to stay in the European Union. But let's put that aside for a moment. There are people believing that this will help Donald Trump. He is talking about nationalism. He is talking about borders. He's talking about immigration. And they believe that the Europeans may have taken even a hint from Donald Trump in Brexit, and that this will help him in his political aspirations here in America. Your take?
I think so. I think what you're seeing in many parts of the world, as Martin has so eloquently described, in various countries of Europe, in Britain for sure, and I think in America too, it's not just Donald Trump, but it's also Sanders. Both of them anti-establishment.
Yes.
Every time a British politician, or even a foreign politician like an American president comes along and tells the British how to vote, people resent it. Those are part of the political elite. We hate them. And there's a great resentment because governments haven't produced. They've crucified people's wages, crucified the middle class with taxes and everything else, standard of living falling, and just pumping more and more money. But it's going to the elite. It's going to hedge funds and the huge financial assets. The rich have got much richer. The poor have got poorer. And people are sick and tired. They see politicians openly lying on television, and they're sick and tired of it in many parts of the Western world. And I think it's going to help Donald Trump just as it helped Sanders.
All right, Martin, let me bring you in here for one last shot, 30 seconds. Do you also think that this is people sick and tired of immigration and people crossing their borders, and that's why basically, as Donald Trump said, they want their borders back? 30 seconds?
Of course, absolutely. And it isn't anti-immigration per se, it's to get control of immigration so that illegal and uncontrolled immigration cannot happen. John's nailed it. He's absolutely right. The British want to be masters of their own destiny again.
Martin, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and also it'll be interesting to see what Scotland does as well. I'm sure you're watching that as well overseas.
Absolutely.
Martin Sieff, thanks so much for joining us. John, I want to thank you for being here. Obviously, we've got 2 years to go in this. Very brief, yes or no? Do you think that they'll come back to this vote anyway, that this may change again? They'll try to get back in, somebody will bring them back?
Absolutely not, particularly if Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister.
And do you think yes or no? Do you think he will become Prime Minister?
Definitely. I forecast that months ago.
All right.
And I'm almost sure now.
Here we go. Now you're sure, and now we're sure that we've got to continue this discussion. John, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. The Political Animal next on The Hardline.